One check.
Hey, Jim. Good to see you. Here we go.
Whoa, 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 whoa.
Well, good evening. Thanks everybody for being here again. What a treat this is to get to experience this way. And I was touched by so much of it, and look forward to jumping in, talking a bit about it with the three of you. In case everybody doesn't know, and there's no reason you would. I'm Randy Lewis. I covered pop music for the Los Angeles Times from 1981 to 2020, almost 4 decades. And one of my areas of special interest and involvement was always anything Beatles related, group or solo projects. I had the great pleasure and honor of interviewing Yoko several times on different stories. Olivia Harrison, Paul, Ringo, George Martin, Giles Martin. Many in Beatle world, and so getting to dive into this with these three gents is a special treat. Let me give you a little bit of overview of the project. This is such a sliver of what's there. I received a copy of the box set, 12 discs. There's hours, days, weeks of stuff to explore in all this, in so many dimensions of it. I'll say that we're celebrating not only the release of the Power of the People box set, but a remarkable chapter in the lives of John Lennon and Yoko Ono, and it's one that captures both their idealism and their humanity. From 1971 to 72, John and Yoko were at the height of their creative partnership. Newly arrived in New York, they quite literally took this to the streets, engaging with the city and its people in a way few public figures of their stature ever had, and likely ever will. They used their platform to speak out against war, sexism, racism, and abuses of power by the federal government, which was also a very personal issue for them because they were targeted by the Nixon administration and spent years fighting efforts that were made to deport them. Fortunately, things came down in their favor. John got his green card, and they were able to stay. A highlight of the profoundly fertile period was the one-to-one concert at Madison Square Garden, which, as was noted, John's only full-length concert after the Beatles disbanded. It was held to benefit children with developmental disabilities. The performances form the centerpiece of the collection and the box set project, but there's so much more involved in it, and it gives us a fresh and revealing exploration of the 1972 album, Sometime in New York City, which was a musical diary of activism, art, and life in motion. So, to give credit where it's due, Power of the People was produced by Sean Ono Lennon and his 5-time Grammy Award-winning team of Paul Hicks, Sam Gannon, Rob Stevens, and Simon Hilton, who won the Grammy Award earlier this year for Best Box Set or Special Limited Edition Package for the bar-raising and mind-blowing Mind Games Ultimate Collection Super Deluxe Edition, released by UME. This lovingly compiled 12-disc, 123-track collection includes 90 never before heard and previously unreleased recordings that chronicles and celebrates John and Yoko's most political era. It boasts a wealth of unreleased demos, home recordings, jam sessions, live cuts, unique mixes, and much more. All tracks have been completely remixed and re-engineered from the original analog tapes by Paul Hicks and Sam Gannon, using brand new HD multi-track transfers by Rob Stevens, with the mixes mastered by Alex Horton at Abbey Road Studios. This includes the Atmos mixes you just heard. Joining me tonight to discuss the extraordinary era are three people who lived it alongside them. Celebrated drummer Jim Keltner, who you just saw on stage in the one-to-one footage. and also John and Yoko's lifelong friends, actor and author Dan Richter, and the celebrated Elliot Mintz, friend, confidant, legendary broadcaster. Long before I had the pleasure of meeting him and getting to know him, I already felt like he was a family member, listening to him on the radio here in Los Angeles, learning so much for so many years. Dan is best known as Moonwatcher, the man-ape in the opening sequence of Stanley Kubrick's 2001: A Space Odyssey. Not only did he create that indelible performance, he choreographed the entire sequence, so throw the man a bone. Dan has had a long career as a mime, choreographer, actor, director, producer, memoirist, and for 2 decades, a Hollywood executive. He lived and worked with John and Yoko from 1969 to 1973, which he writes about in his book, The Dream Is Over, London in the 60s, Heroin, and John and Yoko. Jim Keltner first played with John in 1971 on the Imagine album, and went on to play on some of John's solo albums, most of John's solo albums, including Sometime in New York City, Mind Games, Walls and Bridges, and Rock and Roll. His studio and live credits are beyond compare, but they include albums with George Harrison, Ringo Starr, as well as the Rolling Stones, Fiona Apple, the Bee Gees, Phoebe Bridgers, Michael Bublé, Cher, Leonard Cohen, Harry Nilsson, Brian Wilson, a guy named Bob Dylan, and many, many more. Yeah. And Elliot became one of John and Yoko's closest friends and confidants after interviewing Yoko on the radio first in 1971, followed by an interview with John. This led to a close friendship, with late-night phone calls becoming a daily ritual. Elliot considered John his closest friend until his assassination in 1980. Following this, Yoko asked Elliot to become the official spokesperson for the Lennon estate. Since then, Elliot has played a pivotal role in preserving John's legacy. And while cataloging John's belongings, he discovered hundreds of hours of unreleased recordings, including unfinished songs, early versions of famous hits, and idle thoughts. With Yoko's blessing, Elliot launched a syndicated radio series called The Lost Lennon Tapes, which aired for 4 years and featured more than 200 episodes. He later hosted a spin-off program, The Beatle Years. He recently wrote about his time with John and Yoko in his new book, We All Shine On, John and Yoko and Me, published last year. So please join me in welcoming him. In looking at this, diving into the box set myself, thinking about back on the history, what came before it, what came after, maybe this is a good starting point for you, Elliot. It strikes me that this period of 71 and 72, when they were living on Bank Street, I think of that as a singularly liberating time in their lives. Would that be an accurate way to put it? They had a new country, a new home, a new band, new friends, new surroundings, new ways of recording, new ways of songwriting. What was their feeling about all this?
First, thank you very much for those generous remarks. Should I be speaking to you or should I be speaking to the audience?
Oh, talk to them.
Talk to them.
Sure.
The first thing I wanted to say to the audience is, tonight as we sit here, Sean Ono Lennon is celebrating his 50th birthday. And I know that our sentiments are flowing in the direction of New York, where he is also hosting one of these gatherings as well, and partying later. I'm just blown away by what we've just seen. I've never heard sound, I've never seen color. And it's, a very emotional experience for me, who spent the amount of time that I did with John. Just seeing him singing well, well, well. Just those words over and over again in that close-up. Turning those three words into some kind of mantra, sung with such passion and dimension. And of course the song Cold Turkey was addressing the time that John and Yoko were trying to get off of heroin, cold turkey. I met them shortly after that period. They got off of heroin with the aid of a doctor who prescribed methadone to them, which is supposedly a heroin substitute. Unfortunately, they got addicted to methadone. They had very addictive personalities. I met them around that era. They were everything that you see in this presentation, true to their belief systems, passionate, uncompromising, courageous, and I just miss my old pal.
It strikes me in watching this and seeing John performing in the one-to-one concert, just how assertive he was, how confident he was. He put out two phenomenal albums, the John Lennon Plastic Ono Band and Imagine, but he hadn't toured with them. He hadn't played live that much. There were, just very sporadic one-offs. Maybe Dan, can you talk to how, was this validating for him to go in front of audiences and play with these other musicians and really assert himself as a solo figure in the music world?
Well, the thing about John is that he always gave 120, 130, maybe 135%, And I can remember when we were recording Imagine in the sound studio we built at Ascot, standing there in awe. I think he was singing Jealous Guy or something like that, and thinking, now I understand why one of the main reasons the Beatles were so incredible is this man who was able to be so strong and yet at the same time so vulnerable. He opened himself up. Who would want to expose themselves that much? And he did it in front of the whole world. And it meant a lot. And I also want to just say that I'm very proud of the one-to-one concert because we put the technical side of that together. We had, I think, 11 cameras, so we could do close-ups. We had a 16-track tape truck, off stage. We had Phil Spector, who was mainly out of his mind, but in fact, he got so crazy that the fight broke out with the Secret Service, the FBI, because Mrs. McGovern was there, and a bunch of people. And Phil, of course, dove into this, you see, and I grabbed him by the collar and his back, the belt and the back of his pants. I pushed him onto stage because I figured they wouldn't follow him there. He saw an empty keyboard and landed on it, But we tried really hard to give them the best quality we could. And I'm sitting here, when I first saw this, I was thinking, Jesus Christ, that was good. That was good. It paid off. But the thing, I won't ramble on too much, but I'm an old man, I can do that. The thing is that you knew if you were around John at that time, is this man could give so much all the time. He was never off. We could be having breakfast in a little place in Spain, and he'd be working on a song. He'd turn whatever. He'd start a song about eggs. Anyway, it's great to be here with all you wonderful guys.
Well, Jim, let me ask you, musically speaking, because you played on the Imagine album, studio production, all that goes into that. And when they got to New York City, he really talked about wanting to do things in a much more immediate way, without the all the overlayers that go into so much of studio recording. And they said they wanted to treat it like a newspaper, put it out. The songs are about people who were in the headlines at those moments: Angela Davis, John St. Clair, Attica State, Sunday Bloody Sunday. So was there a significant difference for you in playing when you were working on Imagine versus sometime in New York City? Was New York City where they 1, 2 takes and we're done?
Well, for me, I came in with John on Jealous Guy. And so coming in to meet John Lennon and play on that song, it was like, it was otherworldly for me. Nicky Hopkins, I don't know if you all know, you all know his name and stuff, but he's one of the greatest keyboard players ever lived. And I had the good fortune, I had the really great blessing of spending a lot of time with him in the studio, various people, but John and Nicky was a magic combination. Klaus, a feel, that I had never, I played with all the greatest musicians pretty much you could play with, and the combination of Klaus and Nicky was perfect. It was perfect. You couldn't do anything wrong. So that's where I came in with John. And, so later with New York City, the thing about John was that he loved New York more than anything. And he just always talked about it, and we did a lot of really great stuff in New York at one of the great studios there. And with Phil. And Phil was a handful, of course. But he was brilliant. There's always, with brilliant people like that, there's always something that comes along with it. But so when the one-to-one thing came together, it was elephant's memory to me. That's what I remember. And I thought, okay, this is going to be loose and crazy, and that was one of the reasons why he wanted me there. He thought maybe I could keep it like in a groove in a way. But those guys were really good, and this tonight, hearing this, the mixes that Sean did it.
Yep.
Fantastic. I mean, just rocking like crazy, and it wasn't as loose as I remember. I mean, I remember it being like, I was in the world of making records, and you do everything like this, and to go and be with those guys, and John encouraging it all to be wild, and loose and careless, carefree, I should say. It was fun because it was always fun to be around them. And then I got to know the guys in the band, and so we had fun. But I never took it very seriously. So I'm thrilled to see that it sounds really good. What was the original question?
Well, just again, working on sometime in New York City, was it a lot of first take, second take, and we're done, or was there?
No, with John, even with the real polished records and stuff, he's quick. He doesn't want to stay on anything very long. That would be one of the main arguments with he and Phil, because Phil was used to going till it was really good. But John's instincts were always amazing. He was in a band that was that he produced pretty much, along with the other guys and the great producer. so he knew what he was doing. You know, but yeah, it wasn't a lot of with the Elephant's Memory stuff. It was quick.
One of there's a comment in the book from Roy Cicala, one of the engineers, who said of Elephant's Memory, said they were crazy musicians. They were all great, but you had to catch them in the first 2 hours of recording because they were in Never Never Land after that.
Oh well, yeah, there's that.
Is he talking musically or pharmacologically?
Yeah, you know, I have over the years, with all the interviews and everything, I've sort of gotten away from. I used to have fun talking about that part of the thing, and I've got, I don't know, maybe it's age or something. I just don't, I don't talk about that much, but it was insane. I don't know, there's a bunch of people out there way younger than me, but they're getting there, I can see. And so you were probably a little bit of that generation, enough to know what we're talking about here. It was crazy. And yes, the band, you know, those guys, they were wilder than we were, because they were New York wild, you know, punk kind of guys before punk. And so yeah, they'd be starting to have fun very early on. And I, you know, just as an aside, I was always, as messed up as I was in those days, I was always trying not to be. So I would kind of blame other people for my, and I said, well, if it hadn't been for them, I'd have probably been okay. You know, but yeah, that was kind of my excuse.
Another thing that struck me in watching this is Yoko's role in this and seeing her during the performances. And I'm thinking, you know, she's up there, she's at her keyboard, and she's still in the boys' club. Was she? Did the musicians, the people around, respect her and her music? Did they give her the same kind of consideration? And maybe that's an Elliot, maybe it's a Dan question. Did she feel that she was being respected for what she was trying to do?
Yeah, I think that's a big question. I knew Yoko long before John, and I had first met Yoko in Tokyo when I was studying the No and the Kabuki theaters. Sort of a crazy choreographer from America, interested in how the Japanese do it. And Yoko at that time was associating with people like John Cage, you know, people, highly respected people in the far out world of art. And she had a whole, when John came along and they fell in love, in fact, she came to me one day and said, I met this guy named John Lennon. People tell me he's famous. Who is he? You know, she didn't know who he was. You know, she found out, you know. But so Yoko went from being way out here. I had produced her and Ornette Coleman at the Albert Hall, and they weren't great together. Ornette, they were just riffing and wonderful, and it worked fine. But when she first started out with John, people say, what is she doing? You know, she's just yowling and screeching and whatnot. But as you can see here from the one-to-one concert, she's already figuring out how to fit in, and like this wonderful thing she did on Cold Turkey was very appropriate. It fit the whole style of the evening. It fit in musically. So she was going through a lot of changes, and by the time of one-to-one, and I think the period in New York, she had already, like you saw the thing that we did at the Apollo for Attica. She had already sort of figured out how to fit in, you know. And of course, now as people look back on her music, Elliot, remember when we were at Disney Hall?
Yes.
That wonderful evening?
Yes, I do.
Yeah, and Elliot got me backstage to Yoko, and we were holding each other's hands, and I said, you really made it. You've come so far. And the two of us, we were both, tears were in our eyes, you know, because we had, the old days, in the early days, they made us scrape and fight for everything. I was working out at MGM, and she'd come up to me one day and say, "Can you get me a smoke machine?" You know, and you know, and well, I'm talking again. Sorry about that, folks. I'm rambling, but I saw a side of Yoko that nobody else saw. I knew this side of her, and in fact, I think that's one of the reasons that she asked us to come out to Tittenhurst Park, so that she could have some of her friends, you know, who knew who she was and respected her for this this wonderful artist, this, well, more than wonderful, this genius artist that she was.
Alan, I was gonna ask, listening to and watching the incredible performance she did of Don't Worry, Kyoko, and knowing what was going on at the time with her daughter, that, I mean, it just tears your heart out, what she did on that. Was it widely known, that, you know, that they were having to go through this custody battle at that time? Would an audience have been clued into that?
No. And for those of you who might not be familiar with it, Yoko had a daughter with a man who would later kidnap Kyoko, her daughter, and John and Yoko spent a fortune with private detectives going around the world trying to find out where Kyoko was for years and years and years. Kyoko's father was a fundamentalist who kept her secreted in safe houses all around the place. He felt that John and Yoko would be a terrible influence on this little girl, with things like bed-ins and nudity on their album cover, etc. So when Yoko sings, "Don't worry, Kyoko," don't worry, she is telegraphing a message to her daughter. She once took out an ad in People magazine addressing it to her, saying, "If you should come across this article on your mother, for years, fake Kyokos would show up at the Dakota building and try to convince the watchman to let her in to see her mother." One of my assignments back then was to interview Kyokos to see if any one of them actually was a candidate. After all that time and after all that money, after Kyoko turned 21, she did show up at the Dakota building. She did speak to her mom on the phone, who asked the doorman to let her up to the top floor, and they reunited. It's a cry, it's a wail, and even more to your question, Yoko never received the respect that she deserved, ever. I go so far as to say that she was one of the most vilified women of the 20th and 21st century. It wasn't until after John Lennon's murder that people began to look at her in a different way. She said to me once on the phone, "That's a pretty high price to pay for widowhood." Even when she's in the studio and she's talking about how the drums were too loud over her vocal, with all the monkeying around, the drums never dropped, they just stayed there. And when she complained that she couldn't hear herself on the earphones, an engineer said, "Get another set of earphones for Yoko." I don't think that they ever showed up with the earphones. This is not uncommon for the life that she led. But she loved John, and she loved what they created together. I think she liberated John's voice, and later would receive co-writing credit for the song Imagine. I wish you could know her as I have for more than 50 years. In many ways, she's very, very different than the public image, but always passionate, always philanthropic, always committed. By the way, I don't mean to break format, but I always think it's so professorial when any of us sit here with a microphone talking one way. If I were there, I'd feel like I was in school. If any of you
There'll be a quiz later.
if any of you have any questions for any of us about John Yoko, just raise your hand and feel free to stand up and ask the question. And if you're shy, we'll just carry on. In a little while, we can send out for omelets and
Well,
sing all night.
you mentioned Yoko liberating John's voice, and it struck me watching this, hearing him sing "Well, Well, Well" in Cold Turkey, and hearing that rapid fire tremolo in his voice, which to me is very characteristic of Yoko, and it seems to me he's trying to, take on some of the qualities that she brought musically, and he's trying to incorporate that as well. And the exchange went both ways. Dan?
Yeah, I'm sorry, Elliot. I just want to say that John once said to me, Yoko said to me one day, when you sing, I want to hold your hand, millions of people around the world hear those words. Why don't you say something important? and it's so typical of Yoko. And if you notice, all of the songs are about something important.
Yes.
And they're not just about feelings and puppy love or whatever. They're about big issues, and every one of them, and that's Yoko. And I think that Imagine, and I, as Elliot mentioned, she finally got the writing of it, because those are her words. Those are her words. And when we were recording Imagine at Tittenhurst, I remember they would come down, and they had worked everything out. As you were saying, Jim, John was a great producer. He knew exactly what he wanted to do. It wasn't haphazard at all, and he had worked it out with Yoko. I remember Yoko writing down the music as she actually was educated. I don't mean that in a negative way, but she studied music, went to Sarah Lawrence, studied music, and was highly respected in the among avant-garde musicians.
Yeah, that's the way I remember her. I met her before John. I was there doing something, and I got a call to come down and play. And Bobby Keys, you remember the sax player of the Stones? He and I were very close friends, and so we came to the session, not knowing what to expect, except that I had heard about her and Ornette.
Yeah.
Ornette Coleman and Yoko Ono. So I said, I knew she must be bad. But we got to the session, and the first thing that I noticed that there wasn't going to be a drum set for me to play, and so I was to actually just sort of look around and see something that I could pick up and play. And I found a couple of little odd little concert toms, and so I said, okay, I'll make these be tablas. So I put towels over them, and I was getting a little bit of a sound, a kind of an idea of what to do, because she had played us this thing. It was from her album Fly, and then she asked Bobby, can you take the mouthpiece out of the horn? What does it sound like without the horn? And I thought, oh man, this going to be weird. And it was, and she loved it, And that's the way she came into my life. I love that. And then, you know, you talk about Imagine and the words and all that. She was a huge influence on John.
Yeah.
That's one of the reasons why he fell for her so hard, you know. He loved how smart she was and how she wasn't normal musically, or normal pretty much in any way. And anyway, and I think you're right. I think that she never was taken seriously. You know, I mean, I don't know, never, but I know for a long time she wasn't given, the thing that gets me is that when I knew I was coming here to do this, I've talked so much about John over the years and stuff, and the only thing I can say is that everything we saw today, everything that I remember doing with John, everything that you think about with John Lennon, you think of how old you are, and you think of him being cut down at what, 40?
40.
Think of going away at the age of 40. And a man like that who had so many things to, I mean, we talked from time to time, and one of the last things that we talked about was getting back together, and he had some plans for some stuff. It was going to be rocking, it was going to be pretty, it was, you know, just imagine what he would have done after the age
Like
of 40.
Mozart, like Mozart.
Exactly, exactly.
Very, very similar.
The lady with the blonde hair.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much. Speaking about that, like gun control, the phantom daughters coming in, was it hard for them to live in their apartment building, the Dakotas, being so, famous, and you know what I'm saying? Like, how was the experience of like daily life, and like, why would they choose to publicly be living like there and like not hidden away somewhere, if that makes sense?
Well,
Like,
let me just interject, because when they're at the Bank Street place, they were really on the street. Dakota is a pretty posh place with doormen and stuff like that. They
Yeah.
were living in a back apartment on the streets in Bank Street. They were held up at gunpoint in the apartment once, but yeah,
Oh,
they
yeah.
were out there, and they put themselves out there.
I think your question was, and I don't mean to put words in your mouth.
Yeah.
But you felt by them moving into the Dakota building in New York, it made them more public figures because of that hoity-toity structure.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, let me just respond to that.
Mhm.
When the building was constructed over 100 years ago, real estate people who would have clients who said they just wanted to kind of get away from the city, the real estate people said they've just built a building up past Central Park, but it's so deserted and it's so far away, it's like living in the Dakotas.
Yeah.
It was a place that only had 85 tenants. That was the sum total. And they were all people who wanted to get away from the rest of the interaction. The building was created at that time with its own restaurant, its own barber shop, the place where the horse-drawn carriages would come in and the horses would be tended to overnight. That's how they got away, by creating that little world. And I know it's paradoxical that that little world would be pierced the way it was. Does that answer your question?
It sure does. Thank you so much.
And this gentleman next to you?
Yeah, my understanding is Yoko was involved heavily, obviously, in like the downtown New York avant-garde art scene. Was she doing that prior to meeting John? And my second question, kind of related to that, is, are there stories of her bringing him into her world with people like John Cage and Ornette Coleman? As obviously this, we're seeing it from basically John's perspective. He's bringing her on stage with his rock and roll group. Is the opposite true?
I think that Dan would be the best person, but I did want to punctuate something about the Imagine issue. Long before John and Yoko met each other, Yoko published a book called Grapefruit. And Grapefruit was a series of, you could call them poems, or she called them instructions. And almost each page began with the word imagine. Imagine you're walking down the street and a balloon, a cloud rips your dress. Like a haiku or something of that nature. She was the one who used the word in the instructions, and she was also the one who, again, promoted John to express himself more importantly, more openly, and the rest of the avant-garde stuff, which I don't completely understand.
Yeah, Yoko was one of the founders of the Fluxus movement early in, she had a loft down the Chambers Street. She left the family up on Park Avenue, wherever they were, and she came from a family who were very high social status in Japan and also had money, you know, and so she left this world to do her art, and she was, you know, washing dishes in a macrobiotic restaurant and whatnot, and doing cleaning in a loft so she wouldn't have to pay as much rent, and you know, and she was one of the founders of the Fluxus movement and worked with people like Malcolm Pike and George McCunis, whatnot. And when John first started going to New York with Yoko, I was traveling with them, and we'd get in the limo in the evening and go downtown to the village and below and visit different artists, so that she introduced John to this world at that time. And Henry Flint and George McCunis, people, well, they probably don't mean anything to you guys, but they were part of the avant-garde artists. And I, you know, and John it was like John wanted to be an artist, and I would say, John, you're one of the great artists of the 20th century, you know. But he wanted to get the real thing, you know, and he got it, and Yoko would take him around and introduce him to all these people.
Martin, no relation, Lewis.
Martin Lewis, no relation. Elliot, first of all, thank you to all of you for speaking so eloquently and so passionately and powerfully about John and Yoko. Elliot, a question for you. Living as I did in England, one watched John become political first in 67, 68, really political, and get involved in the British politics. And then, of course, when he moved with Yoko to America, he became involved in American politics. How aware, when I speak to young people about the Beatles and John, the thing that I say that was the most impressive about John is that the world's most powerful man at that time, Richard Nixon, was in fear of John. And I still think that's an incredible concept when you think about it. How aware do you think was John of how much danger he was placing himself in by having the temerity to challenge Nixon and challenge the Vietnam War? And the follow-up to that is, was there any schadenfreude once Nixon went down over Watergate? Did John, it still took another year before he got his green card, but did he have any justifiable satisfaction when Nixon turned out to be exactly the dirty trickster?
As most of you no doubt know, forces in the White House leading all the way up to former President Nixon were afraid of John's influence upon so many younger people and so many people of voting age, and the Vietnam War was raging. And the word went out that anything that could be found on John, or any method that could help get him out of the United States, would be useful to the administration. J. Edgar Hoover, who was the head of the FBI, the only head of the FBI, issued the orders for John and Yoko's phones to be tapped, for cars to follow them wherever they went. This is not me speaking. The ACLU filed an amicus curiae, one of those things, to release all the secret documents that the CIA, the FBI, and other intelligence agencies were holding on John. And thousands and thousands of those pages came back. They're online. There's a book called Come Together by a Professor John Wiener who documents that. They were very afraid of it. They discussed it with Dakota during my first in-person meeting with the two of them in Ojai, California. Yoko took me into the bathroom, turned on the water in the bathtub, asked me to sit close to her, and told me, whispering, "Everything that we say is being recorded. Don't say anything that could get us into trouble." Now, did a team of FBI agents go into that house the day before and hang the listening devices in the lampshades and around the swimming pool? I don't know about that. But I do know that the two of them lived in fear of what could happen, even if they were stopped and a tiny bit of cannabis was found on them. That would be grounds for deportation, and of course would be John who would be deported. So John would be sent back to England. Yoko would be alone. It was my introduction to the world, and it was chilling at best. Later, when Nixon did call it a day and take off, and he was asked about these queries, and was asked to comment about J. Edgar Hoover, he was pretty clear in his feelings. To think that this country, on its highest level, would conspire to remove John Lennon from our country, well, it's akin to Charlie Chaplin, isn't it?
Man, my wife said, don't talk about politics like when you start, it's bad. And I said, okay, I won't. So I'm not going to talk about it, but I think he just said it. Right? I know what you all are thinking.
And there was so much in there in the Sunday Bloody Sunday about the conflicts, the wars going on and everything around it that makes this whole project feel so relevant to right now. So that's another feather in their cap. Question way up there?
Thank you for sharing your reflections. I'd like to take it back to the music for a moment. When I reacted listening to this, my reaction is it's so raw. That it's like the sheen that was on the earlier work that John Lennon did has been removed. And there's a real soul of the band coming out. Was that something that were they self-aware of that at the time, or was it something that was coming out as a product of the environment?
Say that again. Which part was coming out?
The rawness.
Oh, the rawness. Was it intentionally raw, what they were trying to put forth, either in the Sometime in New York City sessions or the one-to-one concert?
I think John, the way I knew John was that he was always wanting it to be raw. Even though, just think of the records, all the Beatle records, they don't sound raw, but they don't sound polished in a very polished way that hit records became, like later on in the 80s, maybe something like that, I don't know. But he always, the thing that I would always hear him say was, to the engineers, was, don't give me one of those fucking, don't give me one of them fucking clean sounds. I don't want the fucking clean sound. And he would always say that. And I knew exactly what he was talking about, and the engineers did too, but you know, they had a job to do, so they would try to, it all worked out, you know. But the New York City thing, what do we call it?
Sometime in New York
Yeah,
City.
Sometime in New York. That record was meant to be raw. And so, you know, and when I say raw, you know, just like things weren't developed to a point where they would be really, really fine-tuned in the arrangement and the feel. So it was just like immediacy, you know, and I think that's good. I like I said, I didn't take it too seriously, and then all these years later, and I listen now to these mixes, and I really like it. I think it was good, but it just reminds me more of where John was headed, you know? It's just so frustrating to think that's it, that's all we know of John. I mean, after that, well, you know, when he got back with Yoko, right?
Yes.
That whole time that he was with May, God bless her, there are several of her really good friends here, and she still is a wonderful lady, and we were all very close and everything. But when Yoko sent John away to L.A., he was with May, and thankfully, because I think on his own it would have been bad, worse than it was. So we had all that great time together, and some good things happened, and some crazy stuff happened. But then when he got back with Yoko, you know, he made that beautiful record, The Beautiful Boy and all
Fantasy.
that. Yeah, and that was one phase for him at that time. And that did well, the record and all that, and he loved it, and you know, it was something that came from his heart, and Sean came, the whole thing, it was a beautiful thing. Then he was ready to go on to the next phase, and he didn't make it. So, and the thing that always got me was, we were talking about it a minute ago, he was so, well, I don't know what the word is, but like to pull up in the car to the Dakota, and for him, he and Yoko to get out, and there's always a little crowd, it wasn't huge, but for him to get out and know that those people just loved him and everything's going to be fine, he's going to go in, you know, and go in, get in the kitchen, have some tea or something. The last thing in his mind was that somebody would shoot him in the back. And that has always been, that was insane to me to know that happened when I always felt like he should have been more careful, and then I felt guilty for feeling paranoid. And so I would never tell him. But anyway, other people that I would talk to, they says, oh man, you know.
Well, I think there's a moment in the one-to-one documentary where they have a phone call with you talking to him and tell him to be more careful.
Yeah, I didn't know they were going to use that, but.
Well, I think we're getting close to wrapping it up. I think we have time for one more question.
And make a comment about talking about the rawness, and I think kind of the precursor to that was Revolution, which was John, Yoko, and George Harrison, I believe, in the studio, collaborating.
Revolution?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think.
Beatles track. Revolution.
Yeah, I think they all worked on it.
Yeah, John, Yoko, and George Harrison.
Oh, and Yoko being involved, yeah, because it was on the White Album, and Yoko was
That was essentially
in the circle at that
Paul
point.
was not in the country at the time.
Yeah.
And that was the session. And Yoko also wrote the lyrics to Julia, but not given credit.
I don't know that I've heard that.
What did she say?
that Yoko wrote the lyrics to Julia.
Seashell eyes, all
I
that.
don't know if that's true.
I couldn't confirm that.
Well, I think we're wrapping it up here, and it's hard, as Jim was saying, not to wonder what would John do, what would John think if he were here, and this comment from Sean that I came across in the book with this whole package, I thought was great, and I made a good note to wrap up on. Sean said, "I've spent most of my life trying to avoid speaking for him. But I do believe that one thing that was consistent about my dad, intellectually and artistically, he was never the same from one year to the next. His mind was always evolving. He was always discovering new ideas and inspiration. Whatever you think John Lennon would think today is probably not it." So thank you for your attention, for your great comments, for your enthusiasm, and go forth and enjoy. Thank all of you for being here too. It's been a real